It's somewhat sad for me to admit this, but I no longer look forward to American-made horror films. That is a very sad admission for me, because at this point in our society, if a horror film is made in America, I pretty much know it's going to be bad. So far this year, there has not been one horror film that has remotely horrified me. All of them have been generic at best, and none of them have been original or have been scary. And when I saw the previews for this movie, it just looked like another piece of generic crap put out by Hollywood. All it looked like was a combination of Paranormal Activity with The Exorcist. Luckily, I can say that this movie actually wasn't that bad. In fact, I really enjoyed this movie, up until about the last 15 minutes. But I'll get into that a little bit later. What we have with this movie is this man by the name of Reverend Marcus. He is raised from a very young age to be a very devout Christian. And from a very young age, he's been going out and performing exorcism on those who believe they are possessed. However, we come to realize very quickly that this reverend is not what he seems. He's actually more of a con man than a reverend. He's going out and performing these exorcisms not because he's trying to free these people of the supposed demons that are inside their bodies. He's just doing it to earn a quick buck. However, we later come to find out that not all of his motivations are selfish. It turns out one of the reasons he's performing these exorcisms is to prevent children from dying. Very early in this movie, we find out that there was an exorcism performed where the child actually died because the exorcist had suffocated the child. So Reverend Marcus is not simply doing exorcisms to make a quick buck. He is doing this to prevent these children from dying. He holds true to the modern belief that no one is possessed, that it's all psychological. And he goes out and performs all these sacred rites and rituals, not to remove a demon from someone's body, but simply to soothe their mind, to make them believe that they are no longer possessed. And in doing so, he believes he's saving lives. So while he does have some selfish motivations, you can tell he is trying to do some good in the world, even if it isn't with a Christian mindset. The camera crew that is following Reverend Marcus decides to follow him on one of his exorcisms. He decides to have one more for this documentary to try and expose what exorcism really is and why it is a fraud. They find this family along with this girl who believes that she is possessed. So Reverend Marcus goes through the rituals, he pretends to exorcise the girl, he holds up the Bible, he screams all the sacred words, and at the end of the day he gets paid, and everyone feels happy. The family believes the demon is gone, the little girl hasn't been hurt, and Reverend Marcus gets a nice paycheck. Everyone's happy in the end. However, we quickly find out that this young girl may actually be possessed. They play on the fact for the entire movie that this all may be psychological, but this girl is becoming so psychotic that it borders on the realm of possession. And let me say before going on, that this story was something I did not expect going in. This story is a fantastic character study about the Christian church and the realm of exorcism. Very early on in this movie, Reverend Marcus makes a comment about how he does not want to work for the Christian church, but he is doing the work of God. He's not going out and removing demons from these children, but he is giving them psychological rest. He is giving them psychological peace. If he can prevent just one more child from dying from an extreme exorcism, then he's done his job. And throughout this movie, we see this man fighting with his own faith. We start to question whether or not Reverend Marcus even believes in God, even when confronted by a little girl who for all intents and purposes looks as though she is completely possessed by a demon. So that much of the movie I did really enjoy. Not to mention that there were some pretty intense scenes throughout the middle of this movie. While I wouldn't call them scary, I would call them intense. And that did pique my interest. However, this movie did have a few things that did upset me. First and foremost, this movie is supposed to be a point of view movie, done in the style of Paranormal Activity, Cloverfield, The Blair Witch Project, Quarantine, I could go on. Now, I have no problem with these types of movies. In fact, I tend to enjoy them. However, it is quite obvious at times in this movie that they had a 2-camera setup. If you're going to have us believe that this is all from the shot of one camera, make it from the shot of one camera. They cut away numerous times throughout this movie, and you can tell they are using two cameras. Every time that occurred, I was taken out of the movie, because obviously this thing had been edited by someone else afterwards. This isn't a first-person movie. This isn't a point-of-view movie. There were obviously two points of view when there weren't two cameras in the scene. How did that happen? Also, I mentioned earlier that I was really liking this movie up until the last 15 minutes, which is true. If this movie had just ended about 15 minutes earlier, I would have loved it. However, the ending to this movie takes such a strange twist that I don't know what to say about it. Now, as all of you know, I don't like ruining the endings to movies, and I'm not going to ruin it on this review. But the ending to The Last Exorcism comes so far out of nowhere that I don't know what to say about it. Now, the obscure ending didn't make me hate The Last Exorcism, but it did leave me scratching my head at the end. If they had just found some other way to end this movie, I would have really enjoyed it. But as it stands the way it is, I just thought it was good. Not phenomenal, not great, but good. And before I go on, I will say this. If any of you do want to know the ending to this movie, I will tell you, but I will not tell you in this review. Shoot me a message, and I will tell you privately what the ending of this movie is. Because I'm not going to post it on this review and ruin it for people who actually want to see it. So, final rating. For the first 3/4 of this movie, I was impressed at what a good character study this was. While it wasn't necessarily horrifying, I was really liking these characters, and the performances were very good. So set aside the fact that there were obviously two cameras being used at certain times, and set aside the fact that the ending to this movie was really screwy, this was actually a pretty good horror movie. Not great, but pretty good. I'm going to give The Last Exorcism 3.5 stars. For someone who has come to dread American-made horror movies, this was a more than welcomed breath of fresh air. While this hasn't restored my faith in American horror movies, at least it's good to see that we can make one or two occasionally. But one thing that actually did really impress me about this movie wasn't even the movie. It was the marketing campaign that went on before this movie was released. I actually had a friend who was a victim of the marketing campaign for this movie, and it was an ingenious marketing campaign. For those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, there was a marketing campaign put out on Chat Roulette that involved this movie. I'm going to go ahead and provide a link for you guys in the bottom of this review so you can see what I'm talking about. But this type of viral marketing was brilliant. And while I don't know how many more people it brought into the movie, it certainly got people talking about the movie. So, take care.